when silence speaks louder than conflict, and what's missing isn't love, but presence. I never imagined the undoing of our routine would begin with something as small as a suggestion. Just us, Elias said. No phones. No plans. Just us. I nodded without asking for details. Not because I didn't want answers, but because, for the first time in a long time, I hoped there might be more waiting for us than the usual explanations. We had been married for 10 years, and somewhere between shared calendars and silent dinners, we stopped remembering what wanting each other used to feel like. We weren't broken. Not loudly, just slowly fading into the background of our own lives. The spark hadn't disappeared. It had settled into reminders to pick up oat milk, into texts about who'd be home first, into goodnight kisses that barely brushed skin. So when he said, "Let's get away," I didn't press. I packed. We left before the sun rose, slipping out of the city as the sky blushed above the freeway. Los Angeles grew smaller in the rearview mirror as we drove north, past the clutter of suburbia and into the quiet that stretched across the California desert. The farther we went, the quieter I became. Not from fear, from something closer to curiosity. The road narrowed as we approached Sedona, crimson cliffs rising like old gods around us, as if nature itself had leaned in to listen. The house was small, just wood and stone tucked beneath a crescent of junipers. No neighbors, no signal, only the sound of wind through pine needles and our own breath catching in the quiet. Elias opened the trunk, pulled out our bags. Then, almost casually, he handed me something folded in his palm, a blindfold. I looked at it, then at him. He didn't offer an explanation, just a small knowing smile, the kind I hadn't seen since our first year together. "Not yet," he said. "But maybe tonight." I raised an eyebrow, half laughing. "That sounds ominous." He chuckled. "It's not. Just trust me." I should have asked more, but something in his voice, low, steady, oddly tender, made me pause. We had come here to remember how to look at each other again, not just across a room, but through. That evening we didn't rush. He cooked. I watched, and for the first time in months, the silence between us didn't feel loaded. It felt sacred. As the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, we sat by the window, wine in hand, legs brushing beneath the table like strangers learning each other's rhythm again. No heavy conversations, no strategies to fix anything, just space. And in that space I felt something loosen. Not my trust, not my boundaries, but my grip on the story I'd been clinging to. That intimacy had to look a certain way. That love meant repetition. That change was always a threat. I didn't know what Elias had planned, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was just open, and maybe that's where everything really began. Not with a kiss, not with a touch, but with permission to feel again, to listen, to be rewritten. Quietly, the road curled beneath us like a slow unraveling breath. We had left behind the static of city life, its rush, its endless noise, its unfinished sentences, and exchanged it for a long stretch of sky and the open pulse of desert air. It was the kind of drive where even small talk felt unnecessary. Elias kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near mine on the center console, close enough to touch, but not yet touching. We weren't avoiding each other. We were remembering how not to fill silence just to avoid feeling it. As the miles slipped by, I watched the landscape change. Cactus gave way to pine. The sun, once glaring white, mellowed into something golden and low, casting long shadows across the cliffs like time slowing down just for us. We arrived just before dusk. The cabin wasn't luxurious, but it didn't need to be. It had warmth in its bones, stone walls, wooden beams, windows that welcomed the mountains in like old friends. And most importantly, it had silence, the kind that feels earned. He carried our bags inside without speaking. I followed, unsure what this was building toward, but certain it wasn't nothing. Elias turned on a single lamp, let it hum quietly in the corner, and lit a few candles like muscle memory from years past. Our early days, our softer days. Then from his duffel bag he pulled out the blindfold again. This time he didn't offer it to me. He simply placed it on the edge of the dresser and looked at me. Not in challenge, not in secrecy, but in invitation. That night we made dinner together. We danced between the stove and the sink like we used to before responsibility rearranged us. He chopped. I poured wine. We didn't speak much, not because there was nothing to say, but because something else was being said in the way his fingers brushed mine when I passed him the salt, in the way his eyes lingered a half-second longer than usual, in the way I didn't look away. When we sat down to eat, he didn't ask about my day. He asked, "Do you feel okay here?" I paused, then nodded. "I feel like I can breathe." "Good," he said and smiled. "The real kind. The kind that's only visible when someone is truly present." After we ate, he stood behind me, hands resting lightly on my shoulders. "I want tonight to be different," he said. "Not wild, not reckless, just real." My body didn't tense. It listened, and without saying anything more, he took my hand and guided me toward the bedroom. He didn't reach for the blindfold again. Not yet, because this wasn't about rushing toward an outcome. It was about building something neither of us had words for yet, only permission and trust. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the low glow of a candle melting slowly near the window. I sat on the edge of the bed, wine still warm in my veins, the hush of the canyon pressing gently against the windows like a lullaby we didn't know we needed. Elias stood across from me, silent for a moment, then picked up the folded silk, the blindfold. He didn't offer it right away. Instead, he walked to where I sat and knelt in front of me, not as a gesture of submission but of care. He looked up, searching my face, and asked quietly, "Do you trust me tonight?" His voice wasn't daring. It was steady, anchored, gentle. I swallowed, not because I was afraid, but because something in his tone made it clear. This wasn't about a game. This was about something deeper. Letting go. "This isn't about fantasy," he said again, his thumb tracing the inside of my wrist. "It's about feeling, without distraction, without fear." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to follow him, but because it had been so long since I allowed myself to be led. I was always the steady one, the composed one, the one who held things together when life pulled at the seams. But here in this room, in this moment, I didn't want to hold anything anymore. I nodded, not loudly, but clearly. He stood and stepped behind me. The silk slid over my eyes, soft and cool. And just like that, the world narrowed, not into darkness but into feeling. With sight gone, everything else amplified. The creak of the wooden floor beneath his steps, the slight shift in air when he moved, the warmth of his palm against the small of my back. He didn't rush. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if reading a language he'd once forgotten but was learning again. My breath deepened, not from arousal, from presence, the kind that says, "I'm here. Nothing else matters." I could have taken the blindfold off. He hadn't tied it. There were no constraints, no commands, only a silent offering. "Feel this, as deeply as you want, or not at all." And I chose to stay. Not because I was curious where it was going, but because for the first time in years I felt safe enough to not need to know. I thought it would start and end with us, me and Elias, a rediscovery, a rekindling. But when I felt a second presence in the room, the air changed, thickened, not with fear but with awareness. The mattress shifted. not beside me, behind me, and then a hand, not Elias's, softer, cautious, a question asked without words. I froze, not from panic, but from the sudden realization that something unspoken had already been set in motion. And then Elias's hand found mine. "I'm here," he said again, not from across the room but right next to me. His voice was calm, certain. "He's here. Only if you want it." There was no shame in the moment, no pressure, just space, an open field where I could say no, or yes, or nothing. And I chose the latter, because in that moment I didn't want to speak. I wanted to feel what it meant to be trusted, so deeply, so completely, that even this, something unimaginable to a younger version of myself, felt safe. I whispered, "Let him," not to Elias, not to the other man, to myself. "Let yourself be touched, not to prove something, not to perform, but to simply exist fully in your skin, in your want, in your breath." The stranger's hand didn't demand. It waited, read the rhythm of my breathing, responded when my body answered before my voice could. His gesture lingered, warm and careful, as if waiting for my breath to say yes. And Elias didn't withdraw. He stayed with me, breathing with me, anchoring me, his hand in mine, his presence at my side, his trust unshaken. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography, a quiet unfolding between three people, none of whom were trying to be anything other than exactly who they were in that moment. There were no roles, no performance, only willingness, only presence, only yes. Time blurred. I couldn't see the clock, couldn't trace the contours of their faces, but I felt everything. It became a moment suspended in warmth, where time softened around us. It was a current, warm, pulsing, alive with breath and hands and unspoken permission, subtle and reverent, like a quiet rhythm we had forgotten. They were symphonic, two people tuned to the same rhythm, composing something tender and electric around me. Elias was at my side, always. His lips found mine slower, deeper than they had in years, not claiming, reconnecting. His fingers laced with mine, grounding me, not to the bed, but to the moment. The other man didn't take. He offered, touching without urgency, kissing without agenda, pausing often, listening not just with his body but with his awareness. Each gentle touch seemed to ask something deeper, each sigh of mine an answer. And for once I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't have to earn this affection. I didn't need to present a version of myself. I just had to be real. I just had to be present. The silence was thick but soft, like velvet stretched across something sacred. No one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because language would have only diminished what was happening. There were no confessions, no labels, only hands, breath, permission. I felt Elias guide the other man with a gentle pressure, like a conductor leading without ego, inviting harmony, not control. There was a kind of reverence in how they moved around me, not treating me like something to be used, but something to be known, a landscape to be rediscovered, a heartbeat to be heard. And I let it happen, not because I had planned to, not because I needed something new, but because this, whatever this was, felt honest, felt healing, felt like something my body had been whispering for years but my mind had been too careful to hear. The world didn't rush back in, no flood of guilt, no frantic need to explain, just quiet, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled because it means something. I lay there between them, the blindfold still resting loosely over my eyes, soft and damp from breath, the sheets tangled around my legs, my body humming, not with heat anymore but with something steadier, a kind of knowing. Elias was on my left. His fingers traced slow, thoughtful circles along my wrist, not possessive, not nervous, just there. On my right, the stranger. I didn't know his name, and I wasn't sure I needed to. He hadn't spoken, but everything about his presence had been articulate, gentle, aware, present without performance. His breathing matched mine now, as if all three of us had found the same rhythm without meaning to. We didn't speak, none of us, because words in that moment would have only tried to categorize what was never meant to be boxed or labeled. This hadn't been about novelty, or shock, or sin. It had been about presence, about returning to the body in a way I didn't know I had been starving for. Elias shifted and with care loosened the blindfold, not yanking it away, just letting light seep in gently. The soft glow from the bedside lamp touched the room like morning, and in that light everything looked quieter, not washed out, not faded, just still. I turned my face toward Elias. He met me with his eyes open, steady, not triumphant, not wounded, just loving, still loving me even now, maybe more because of now. "Are you okay?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I nodded, but I didn't say yes because okay didn't quite cover it. What I felt was deeper, a quiet anchoring, a rootedness, not in them, but in myself. I didn't feel lost, or broken, or undone. I felt anchored, not to either man beside me, but to something within myself I hadn't touched in years. A quiet pulse, a clear breath, a deeper stillness. For so long, I had shaped myself into the version of womanhood I believed was safest. Good partner, reliable wife, emotionally efficient. Desire, when allowed, had always needed a reason, a reward, a ritual, a responsibility. But last night had asked for none of that. It had only asked for presence. And in that space, unguarded, unnamed, I had finally stepped beyond the outlines of who I thought I needed to be. And I didn't vanish. I didn't fall apart. I returned. Elias hadn't given me permission to betray anything. He had given me permission to remember, to be wanted without choreography, to be touched without instruction, to be seen fully without needing to apologize for the shape of my longing. And in doing so, he didn't lose me. He found me, or maybe we found each other again, beneath the routines, beneath the roles, not as who we were before, but as who we had quietly become. Beside me, the stranger stirred. He touched my shoulder gently, with gratitude more than longing. Not intimate, not intrusive, just grateful. Then he rolled away, leaving only warmth in his place. No words, no expectation, only a trace of something tender and temporary, and somehow whole. The air shifted again, lighter now, and in the corner of the room the old jazz record crackled back to life. We'd forgotten to turn it off. I smiled, because the music was still playing, and so were we. We didn't talk about it the next morning, not because we were avoiding it, but because we weren't trying to define what had happened. Some experiences don't need language. They need space, to breathe, to echo, to be remembered without being dissected. People will try to label what we shared that night. They'll call it an open marriage. They'll call it reckless, or brave, or betrayal. And maybe to them it has to be something, because the idea that it could just be without explanation makes them uncomfortable.